Haruka is an antisocial loser who gets ignored by his classmates until they're all Isekaid to another world. However, everything changes when he accidentally unlocks an infinite luck cheat and starts cracking everyone. It all starts in class, where the lonely Haruka is contemplating how he doesn't fit with any of his classmates. Suddenly, a magic circle appears beneath the class, and while others panic and get sucked into it, Haruka tries to avoid it by climbing onto the roof. However, he still ends up getting transported, and the next thing he knows, he's standing in a strange white space face to face with an old man who hands out abilities to newly summoned heroes. But then, the old prune informs him that Haruka arrived last, and all the overpowered abilities are already taken, leaving him with abilities more trash than Drake's new album. Out of frustration, Haruka tells the old man to choke on a fat glizzy or get him a better ability, but the old man refuses to be disrespected, dumps every leftover skill onto Haruka, and sends him straight to the fantasy world. When he gets there, Haruka realizes that he needs to check his stats, and when he goes to check, he gets told to roll the dice to boost one of his stats. When he does, he gets the max number and goes to look through all his stats. When he sees that he has a luck stat, he decides to put all of his points into it, making him have maximum luck. Then, he starts preparing to make a shelter, and by pure luck and using his appraisal skill, he discovers an empty cave, and he decides to turn it into his home. The next morning, he goes out to get more resources, but he then encounters goblins whose levels are higher than his, but he knows that he needs to fight sooner or later, so he decides to grow a pair and throw hands. With his abilities, he uses magic on his staff and gives the goblins the same trauma the Goblin Slayer gave their species, and ends up winning. When he returns home, he discovers that the battle has boosted his abilities, giving him a glimpse of how useful some of his worthless skills might actually be. Some days later, he decides to hunt meat for dinner, and when he spots a rabbit, he goes after it and manages to catch it. But before he gets to turn it into a bunny kebab, his detection skill suddenly activates. When he looks closely, he first spots his classmates, including the bully group, all approaching from far away in different directions. He decides to stay away from them, but he then spots someone he always had a soft SPT for, the class rep, Toka, who has always been kind to him. For a second, he wants to go meet her, but he quickly stops himself, reminding himself of his goal to be free and master this new world all alone. Keeping low to the ground, Haruka watches as the bully group passes through the forest, but a small noise gives away his position, and their head honcho immediately notices and begins investigating the nearby bushes. Haruka freezes, but just as the bully reaches toward his hiding spot, the rabbit Haruka had been holding pops out, and it diffuses all suspicion that someone is there. After they leave, Haruka is curious about what they're up to, so he decides to follow them. He then finds them near a river, and when he listens in to find valuable information, he finds that all they talk about is the hot baddies in class and how they would love to expand their creamy domain. But then, he discovers that they got a hold of Tanaka, one of the nerds, and use him as their very own Google search to explain to them about their skills in this world. Once the conversation ends, the bullies head back toward the main campsite where the rest of the class is staying, and Haruka considers following them but ends up deciding not to. Back home, he cooks up his mushroom dinner while hoping he can eat some meat. Then, he notices that his loner skill increases and realizes that it's because he avoided his classmates. But then, he notices how slow his leveling up is, and he curses some of his abilities for holding him back, and the old man who screwed him like Johnny Sins screwing chicks. That night, just as he's about to sleep, he hears noises of people fighting outside. Assuming it's the bullies causing trouble again, Haruka heads out to investigate, but he's surprised to see that it's the class nerds fighting off goblins as a team. He suspects that they need help, but after examining them with appraisal, Haruka learns that all of them have some cracked abilities that overpower his, which makes him a little jealous. Seeing that they will probably win, Haruka goes to leave, but then, he spots goblins sneaking around behind the nerds, preparing an ambush. In that moment, Haruka recalls how the nerds were always cool with him, so he decides to jump in and defeat the goblins with his magical stick. Seeing Haruka there, the nerds are stunned, and Haruka then invites them to his cave, where they finally get a chance to rest. The group is amazed by how comfortable and secure his home has become, while Haruka struggles with being praised by this many people at once. Haruka then asks what they were doing away from the others at night, and they reveal the truth that they are on the run. They explain that after the class arrived in this world, panic initially spread throughout the group. Most students had no idea what was happening, but the nerds quickly realized they had been transported to another world and helped explain the situation. Shortly afterward, goblins attacked, forcing everyone into their first battle. While many froze in fear, the nerds stepped forward and helped organize a defense. The stronger students joined in, and together they managed to survive. Following the attack, Toka took charge, and she divided everyone into teams, assigned responsibilities, and established a functioning camp. For a while, things actually worked, with food being gathered, shelters being built, and everyone cooperating. But then, unity began to crack, and some students stopped contributing altogether and left the workload to others. As responsibilities piled up, the nerds and a few students did most of the work required to keep everyone alive. It was then that the nerds discovered that the bullies were secretly plotting to abuse their abilities for freaky plans involving the girls, and the nerds quickly informed Toka. She quickly trained her cracked ability, and when the bullies finally made their move, they were completely unprepared for her growth. Their plan failed spectacularly, and their actions were exposed to the rest of the class, resulting in them being expelled. For some days, it was peaceful, but then, the bullies returned, and they launched an attack that threw the camp into chaos, with fires spreading, people injured, and the base was left destroyed. In the days that followed, many students blamed the nerds for indirectly causing what happened, and despite everything they did to protect the group, they became convenient scapegoats. Toka tried to defend them, but facing so much hatred, the nerds left camp, which was how they end up crossing path with Haruka. After hearing their story, Haruka feels genuinely sorry for them, so to lift their spirits, he prepares a large mushroom feast and lets them stay in his cave for several days. Then, after their small sleepover, the nerds decide to continue their journey, and they reveal that their goal is to reach the nearest city and register as adventurers. Before leaving, they invite Haruka to join them, and Haruka is tempted by the offer, but ultimately declines in the end, still wanting to live a life all alone in this new world. Then, once the nerds are gone, Haruka becomes curious about the state of the remaining classmates and decides to investigate. On his way, he faces a kobold and manages to just defeat it with his magical stick. That night, he manages to reach the others' campsite and finds that they have all moved. Using his tracking abilities, he follows their footsteps, and he accidentally runs into the group of gals. His first instinct is to avoid them entirely, but they spot him and start chasing him. To Haruka's shock, the girls rush over and beg for help. Their leader admits that they've finally realized how they mistreated the nerds and asks if Haruka knows where they want, as the gals want to apologize to them. Haruka scolds them for being complete hoes who did the nerds dirty and asks them if they are even able to survive by themselves to find the nerds. Suddenly, the gals start crying and beg him to help them survive. Suddenly, Haruka's subjugate skill gets activated, and it turns the gals into his mindless slaves, which is a skill you freaks watching would love to have.
Yeah, boy.
As he desperately searches for a way to undo the situation, one thought keeps crossing his mind that if Toka ever saw this, she would scold him so much his ears would start bleeding. But just in that moment, Toka pops up and gets excited seeing him. She tries calling for him, and when he doesn't respond, she screams his name, snapping him out of his deep thoughts. Meanwhile, the exiled bullies gather around a campfire, and still obsessed with revenge, they begin preparing their next move to make the girls their freaky objects to use. Back with Haruka, he instinctively greets her the same way he always has, class rep, and that annoys her. She tells him how she may be the class representative, but to her, Haruka is her childhood friend. Then, the rest of the class's girls arrive, and when they see the gals acting like robots, they get confused by what happened. Toka demands an explanation, and Haruka knows that, however he put it, he will be seen as a total creep, so he simply tells her the truth. Within seconds, the girls look at him like how everyone looks at Kai Sanat for starting a clothing brand. Panicking under the pressure, Haruka attempts a tactical retreat, but Toka immediately shuts that idea down and tells him to sit down. Instead, she frees Suukiho from the skill's effects and asks the girls to explain what happened themselves. After hearing the full story, the girls calm down, realizing that Haruka actually helped them. While everyone discusses the situation, Haruka quietly removes himself from the conversation and focuses on training one of his crafting skills instead. However, his attempt ends with him trapped halfway inside the ground, and Toka ends up helping pull him free. As she does, she thanks him for helping the girls and admits she never expected him to survive this well on his own. Haruka then slips up and mentions how he's planning to head home, and the statement leaves everyone confused. Haruka explains that during his time alone, he built a proper residence for himself that has a functional bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom, which stuns the girls. They quickly discuss among themselves, and right after, Toka asks Haruka if he would let them stay at his place. Hearing that, his mind instantly wanders to places where peaches and cream are more than food.
Yeah, boy.
While he's hesitant, Haruka chooses to let them stay, and the group sets off. As they travel through the forest, Haruka moves fast, constantly anticipating turns and corner before they even appear, causing the girls to wonder what strange abilities he's been hiding. After a while, they reach his house, and the girls are in awe. As compared to the trashy tents they have been sleeping in, the place looks like paradise. When they discover the bathroom, the girls rush in without hesitation, not even caring that Haruka is there to enjoy the view. However, he chooses to isolate himself in a tent outside, fully embracing his loner lifestyle. But the peaceful isolation doesn't last long, and Toka comes to visit him. She admits that leading everyone has been exhausting, as ever since the nerd group left, she's constantly worried about whether she's making the right decisions. Seeing the person he adores like this, Haruka calms her down and assures her that she shouldn't compare herself to the nerds, who are pros at everything isekai related. Toka thanks him for easing her, then leaves him to go to sleep. The next morning, when Haruka opens his eyes, he finds Chika waiting outside his tent, and for a moment, his sleep-deprived brain convinces him that she's here to thank him by giving him a morning sloppy toppy. But Chika is simply there to wake him up for breakfast, and when she mentions that fish is on the menu, Haruka quickly gets up. It surprises the girls to see Haruka eat fish so passionately, and he explains how he is unable to catch them with his bare hands. He then asks the girls how they managed to catch so many, and they take Haruka to watch anime, who demonstrates using her lighting ability to catch fish. Watching the display sparks an idea, and using one of his stranger skills, Haruka captures the electrical energy, stores it, and redirects it into the water himself. That experiment results in him getting a brand new elemental ability to use lightning, and when Toka expresses her amazement, Haruka explains that by using all the leftover abilities he has, he manages to use them effectively, turning them overpowered. Later, Toka explains that her next objective is reaching the nearest town and says that they will need to get more combat experience. Hearing this, Haruka agrees to help train the girls, and he starts by checking their levels. To Haruka's horror, even the weakest girl is significantly higher level than he is. Confident that they can defeat most enemies, he points them toward a group of kobolds hiding, ordering the girls to dominate them. However, it ends pathetically with the girls losing, and they all gather around in Haruka's tent to evaluate their defeat, which impresses Haruka. Later that night, Chika talks to Haruka privately, and she apologizes for how she treated him earlier. She admits that she intentionally tested his character, as after everything that's happened with the bullies, trusting people hasn't been easy, and Haruka understands. From then on, they become good friends. The next morning, Chika once again delivers breakfast, earning herself the unofficial title of Haruka's favorite fish supplier, and over the following days, training continues. Toka and Chika lead by example, refusing to quit no matter how difficult things become, and eventually, the girls challenge the kobolds again. This time, they coordinate their attacks and secure their first real victory. Watching them celebrate, Haruka feels relieved, realizing that they are strong enough to survive now, and he can now return to his loner life. However, Toka thanks him for the help and informs him that he'll be accompanying them to the nearest town, which forces him to come with them. Elsewhere in the forest, another student runs desperately through the darkness away from a mysterious man. But then, he stumbles, falls, and hides inside a hollow tree. Terrified, he begs for mercy, claiming that he's harmless, but the mysterious figure doesn't care, and he chokes the student with no remorse to take his life. As the journey continues, Haruka can't shake the feeling that the class bullies are still somewhere behind them, so he tells himself that they need to get out of the forest as soon as possible. Just then, a massive orc pops up, and Haruka decides to turn the encounter into a lesson for the girls to learn from. He tells them to watch how to handle massive orcs, after he learned from the nerds that magic works best against orcs. However, with his stick, he hits the orc on the head, instantly defeating it by accident, pissing off the girls who were eager to learn. Haruka then promises to demonstrate proper magic combat the next time they encounter one. Luckily, another orc appears, and this time, he launches a fire spell directly at the monster's face and defeats it, but the girls remain unimpressed. From their perspective, Haruka always one-shots them with either magic or brute force, with neither approach being educational. Later that night, they set up camp, and while the girls prepare dinner, Haruka works on improving the camp security. Suddenly, he senses someone actually approaching, and Haruka immediately assumes the bullies have finally caught up to them. However, it turns out to be the jocks, and Haruka is relieved to see them. He instantly assumes that they are here to find the girls, but the jocks immediately deny this and say that they are actually looking for him. They then inform him how they no longer know who they can trust, and how they are aware of a skill that is extremely dangerous called hijack, where the user is capable of stealing other skills by taking other people's lives. Suddenly, Haruka pretends that he's the one carrying such a terrifying power as a joke, but to his surprise, the jocks tell them that they're not worried at all. In fact, they openly admit they'd rather trust someone like Haruka with a dangerous skill than almost anyone else. They then talk about the bullies and how the jocks are convinced that the bullies are planning something and promise to keep watch over them. They also ask Haruka to pass along an apology to the girls for not helping sooner. The jocks then continue their journey to watch over the bullies, but what they and Haruka don't know is that Toka is there listening in. The following morning, Toka approaches Haruka privately, and she tells him that she heard his conversation with the jocks and has something important to tell him. But before she can begin, Haruka calmly reveals that he already knows she possesses the hijack skill. Toka freezes to see that he knows, and then she explains that she always feared the power that she possesses, but what she doesn't understand is why Haruka isn't afraid of her. Haruka simply answers her that just like how the nerds trusted her, he also trusted her to do the right thing and carry the burden of possessing the terrifying power. Hearing that, Toka tears up, and Haruka teases her for crying a lot lately. She tells him that she has been crying a lot because of him, and Haruka immediately runs away from that responsibility, not knowing that Toka feels extremely grateful to have him around. Later that morning, Haruka starts selling fresh juices for the exhausted girls, and one girl is even willing to offer him to pop her cherry in trade for his cherry juice. However, Toka intervenes before Haruka can accidentally make mini Harukas running around. Sometime later, the group reaches a river and claims he wants to scout ahead, but in reality, he's lying. It turns out what he really wants is to experiment with his growing collection of strange abilities. Combining physical enhancement, weight reduction, and magical reinforcement, he launches himself through the forest at incredible speed. One experiment leads to another, and he ends up flying for a bit, and the experience is literally ecstasy, right until gravity tells him to come down, making him crash back to land to kiss the dirt. By the time he returns to camp, he's covered in bruises, and Toka immediately demands an explanation, but he manages to just lie to avoid telling her the real truth. For the next few days, they find their way across the forest, and after a few struggle, they manage to escape it, putting them a step closer to their destination. As the group celebrates, Haruka notices something new in his status screen, a skill called I Hear Walk. Seeing that, he immediately tests it out, and to Toka's amazement, Haruka casually steps onto empty air as though invisible stairs have appeared beneath his feet. He tells Toka that he's going to check the journey in front of them, and using his skill, he finds in their path a group of adventurers being attacked by monsters. Haruka quickly returns and informs everyone. Toka instantly wants to help them out, but Haruka thinks that's idiotic, reminding her that the adventurers could be evil bandits. Despite hearing that, Toka insists that they should try to do good, even willing to fight by herself if things get bad, and that touches Haruka. He then tells her that he will help her, and using a combination of his skills, he creates a new way to fly. However, as he's soaring through the sky, he finds Toka holding onto him after getting dragged by his wind, which ends with the two of them crashing directly into the battlefield. The impact itself defeats the monsters and knocks Toka out unconscious. The adventurers ask if they are okay, and Haruka is surprised that everyone speaks a language he can understand. Then the group's captain, After, introduces himself and explains that they were completing a guild mission to eliminate monsters threatening nearby travelers. Seeing that the adventurers suffer heavy damage, Haruka offers them his grilled mushrooms, and on the first bite, the adventurers are amazed that Haruka manages to find and cook up some rare mushrooms that replenish stamina. While everyone talks, Toka finally regains consciousness, followed by the others arriving as well. Among the adventurers are several women and even an elf, which makes all the girls excited, as they never seen them before. Afterward, the adventurers offer to guide the group to the nearest town, Omui, and the moment the town finally comes into view, excitement erupts among the girls, as after everything they've endured, civilization is finally within reach, and the long journey through the wilderness is coming to an end. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, the bullies have finished training. Now stronger than before, they begin preparing their next move. One of them suggests using their abilities to take control of the girls, but another proposes targeting the nerd group first in order to recover sealed powers. Their leader likes the ideas, and they start making plans to achieve that. What they don't realize is that the jocks are nearby, and they have heard every word. Back in the city of Omwe, some of the girls instantly become distracted by shops selling dresses and accessories like typical gold diggers, and they eagerly rush toward the storefronts, only for Toka to blow her whistle and call everyone back before chaos can begin. Haruka watches with amusement as Toka regains control of the group almost instantly, as despite everything they've endured, she still manages to organize everyone with ease. Once the girls settle down, Toka lays out their priorities. She tells them that first, they will visit the Adventurers Guild and trade any valuable items they've collected. Then, they will register there to become adventurers. Then, they will use their earnings to secure lodging and supplies. And finally, they will begin searching for the nerd group and any other missing classmates. The leader of the gals, Suukiyo, argues that finding the nerds should come first, but Toka insists that they set up properly in the town first. Later, the group arrives at the Adventurers Guild, and the moment they step inside, Haruka notices that the atmosphere feels heavy, where veteran adventurers fill the room, and many of them stare at them like they are fresh meat. The intense stares make Haruka increasingly nervous, and his anxiety only worsens when a guild employee suddenly informs him that the guild master wants to see him upstairs. Certain he's about to get scolded for something, Haruka tells Toka to handle the registration process while he heads to the meeting. But to his surprise, the guild master turns out to be a reasonable man, and instead of criticizing him, he thanks Haruka for helping the adventurer party they rescued outside town. Back downstairs, he discovers a trading counter and decides to sell some of the gemstones he collected during his travels. When the appraiser looks at the gemstones Haruka brought, she nearly falls out of her chair when she sees the amount he places on the counter. She informs him that the guild simply doesn't have enough money available to buy everything immediately, so they discuss it, and they end up agreeing that the guild will purchase the gems through installments. Shortly afterward, Toka and the girls finish registering, and the arrival of all these hot babes changes the mood of the whole guild. During registration, the guild staff are shocked to discover how high the girls' levels are, and Toka proudly explains to other adventurers that Haruka was the reason that they made it through the wilderness and became strong enough to survive, which flusters Haruka. But when it's time for Haruka to register, it goes wrong, as despite all his accomplishments, he's informed that he still lacks the level required to become an adventurer. According to the guild's rules, level 10 is required to register, and Haruka falls just short. Later, they visit the hotels the guild prepared for them, and they are surprised to see how similar they are to Love Hotels, but choose to stay the night anyway. The next morning, Haruka returns to the guild to finalize the gemstone transaction, and it surprises him that the first installment is worth 8 million yen. The girls celebrate immediately, eager to buy proper equipment and necessities. While everyone else plans their shopping trip, Gotek quietly approaches Haruka and recommends a special place where he can spend his newfound wealth. Haruka's imagination instantly runs wild, thinking that he can finally release some pent-up cream.
Yeah, boy.
He follows Gotek, who instead leads him to a magic item shop, and assures Haruka that while Mia Khalifa is not for sale, he can find amazing things in this store. When Haruka browses through it, he finds multiple powerful items he can use, and after a few hours of geeking out, he discovers a necklace capable of combining multiple items' abilities. Suddenly, Toka pops up, scolding him for still being awake. Scared by her, Haruka fumbles a mistletoe charm he's holding and accidentally links all the powerful items in the store. It horrifies the shopkeeper, and he furiously tells Haruka that he has to pay 10 million, which results in Haruka losing all of his wealth. The following day, Haruka decides he has had enough of town life, recalling how his lonely forest life treated him peacefully. He decides to leave, but he knows that he's still not an adventurer, and without the proper permit, he can't legally travel outside town. Faced with these obstacles, Haruka develops a brilliant plan of using his newly acquired invisibility cloak, slipping past Toka and the girls, and begins his escape. Initially, his plan goes perfectly, but when he is about to jump over the town wall, some girls catch him, causing him to turn his dingleberry into jelly. He recognizes the girls as the female jocks of the class, but notices that one of them is missing. When he goes to look for the fourth member, he finds her at the clothing store and is about to change clothes right in public. Haruka and the others rush to stop the impending disaster, and the misunderstanding leaves the girl in tears, forcing Haruka to awkwardly compliment her until the situation calms down, which signals the failed end of his attempt to escape. The following day, Toka and the girls leave town to handle their first official guild quest, and Haruka sees this as the opportunity he's been waiting for. The moment they're gone, he activates his invisibility cloak and slips out of town successfully. He then immediately begins heading toward his old forest home, ignoring several monsters, and focuses entirely on reclaiming his peaceful lifestyle. However, that plan changes when he spots a carriage under attack. Haruka initially tries to ignore the situation, but one of the bandits attacks him first, and with no choice left, he fights back. Using his fire-enhanced cane and various support skills, Haruka quickly realizes that the bandits rely heavily on powerful weapon abilities, which consume enormous amounts of stamina. So rather than defeating them directly, Haruka simply avoids their attacks and forces them to overextend themselves. One by one, the bandits exhaust themselves and collapse. Once the danger passes, a young noblewoman emerges from the carriage, and she introduces herself as Marielle. She reveals that she's the daughter of a local lord, and worried that more bandits might appear, she asks Haruka to escort her for the remainder of her journey. Promising a reward, she convinces him to help. During the trip, Haruka complains about the nearby town that refuses to let outsiders adventure freely, calling the town's lord an absolute knobheads who should choke on his daddy's ding-dong. Suddenly, Marielsa starts crying, and when Haruka asks why, she reveals that the lord he told to choke on a glizzy is her father. The horrifying realization strikes him immediately, seeing that he's being returned to Omui. Elsewhere, the jocks and bullies face off, and the bullies openly announce their intention to pursue the girls and settle things with Toka. but the jocks refuse to let that happen. Suddenly, the mysterious hooded figure appears, and he drives a knife into the bully leader's back, shocking everyone. Seeing this brutality, the other bullies charge in panic, but they end up the same way, with holes in their stomachs. The jocks immediately realize they're outmatched and attempt to flee into the forest, but the mysterious man catches them with ease. Meanwhile, Haruka's attempt to escape town comes to an abrupt end when Marielle brings him to her family's estate. The moment he enters, he finds himself staring at one of the largest buildings he's ever seen, but while he is impressed, he still prefers his man cave. While Marielle steps away to prepare for dinner, he quietly begins searching for a way to slip out. But Marielle catches him almost immediately. Then, as thanks for saving her, Marielle presents him with a feast, and Haruka finds himself surrounded by a lot of meat, so he starts munching like he's Luffy. Then, she presents him with some money for his bravery, and even expresses how she presents herself to him in a beautiful dress as thanks. But to her annoyance, Haruka keeps on stuffing his mouth with meat like Bonnie Blue. Then, knowing that he doesn't have an identity card and a way to get out of town, she hands him a special card with the town's lord's approval, meaning he can now leave town whenever he wants. The following morning, Haruka casually informs the girls that he was invited to Omui's lord's mansion the night before, and the girls demand an explanation, but Haruka simply says that his aura is too much for the lord to ignore, so he invited him for dinner. The girls have no choice but to believe him, and they head off to their quest. But before leaving, Toka tells Haruka sternly not to leave town. Haruka nods along, but the second they're gone, he writes a note to Toka, telling her that he's sorry, and leaves the town to return to his beloved loner life in another world. As soon as he reaches the forest, Haruka feels his mood improve, but suddenly, an orc pops up, and Haruka defeats it easily, but something immediately feels wrong. He knows that orcs are not supposed to be this close to town, and when he investigates the area around him, he spots a blood stain on the ground. He instantly knows something bad has happened, and using his tracking abilities, he follows the trail through the forest. Eventually, he finds the source of the bloodstain, the jocks, who are barely alive. Without hesitation, Haruka chugs all the healing potions he has on them, and it heals the wounds the jocks endured. After regaining consciousness, the first thing their leader asks is whether the girls are safe, and Haruka confirms they're safely inside Omui, which relives the jocks, now knowing they helped protect them. Then, they explain that the bullies are dead, but the jocks weren't the ones responsible, and the mysterious hooded man was. The jocks explain that the attacker specifically kept asking about Toka, and he already knew about the hijack skill. That revelation catches Haruka off guard, as he knew that only he, the nerds, and Toka knew about that. The jocks then inform Haruka that the attacker is a genius who has been manipulating events from the shadows. Realizing Toka may be in danger, they offer to fight alongside him, insisting that with Haruka by their side, they can defeat the attacker. However, Haruka refuses, and while he knows that having backup would improve his chances, he fears that if all of them die fighting, nobody will remain to protect the girls. The jocks reluctantly agree to put their faith in him and warn the others of what's to come. Once they're gone, Haruka finds himself alone again, and for a brief moment, it almost feels like the beginning of his adventure. Then he remembers the enemy waiting somewhere in the forest, and he knows that if he's going to survive this encounter, he needs to become stronger. That night, Haruka begins hunting monsters, starting with measly goblins, which to his surprise, he defeats easily, even though they outclass him in levels. But then, a goblin king appears, and with his giant club, he forces Haruka to get on the defensive and dodges his attacks to avoid his head getting mushed. But Haruka sees this as the perfect opponent to help him grow stronger, and using a combination of his skills, concentrated in his staff, he discovers new ways to strengthen his weapon, and uses it to defeat the goblin king. However, the victory attracts something worse, a level 50 goblin emperor, and Haruka realizes that he's screwed as a level 9. For a moment, he considers running, but then he remembers the condition the jocks were in, and he remembers Toka, which gives him the motivation to fight. The Goblin Emperor then attacks, proving to be Haruka's biggest challenge yet, with every strike knocking on Haruka's death door. But for the whole night, Haruka goes back and forth, gradually increasing his battle prowess and level. By the morning, Haruka manages to claim a glorious victory, and increases himself to level 11, even with all the bruises and cuts her endured. Then, some days later, Haruka waits in front of his cave for a visitor, and as he expected, the hooded attacker shows up. Then, he reveals himself as Tanaka, the nerd who hung out with the bullies. Tanaka calmly explains that he had expected the jocks to lead him straight to Toka, so it annoys him that he ended up facing Haruka instead. Haruka asks if he was the person behind the attacks, and Tanaka states that he was the mastermind who orchestrated everything, including the bullies attacking the camp and collapsing the whole class. Haruka struggles to believe it, but Tanaka calmly confirms that the bullies were simply disposable tools. Haruka demands to know what happened to the rest of the classmates, and Tanaka coldly says that they are all dead in his hands, leaving only Toka and her hijack skill as his target. Tanaka then steps beside Haruka, saying that he's not worth his time, but Tanaka steps between Tanaka and the path leading toward town, hands on his weapon, and aiming at Tanaka's head. Tanaka laughs, seeing a self-proclaimed loner choosing to protect people. But Haruka states that being a loner doesn't mean not caring about others. Back in Omui, the girls begin growing increasingly worried about Haruka's disappearance, and they return from a gemstone quest and discover the jocks have arrived in town, injured heavily but alive. The moment Toka sees them, he asks if Haruka is with them, and the jocks' leader, Harumi, tells her that Haruka is in the forest fighting a powerful enemy all alone, all for her sake. Toka and the girls immediately want to rush into the forest and help Haruka, but Harumi stops them. He reminds them that Haruka specifically promised to handle Tanaka himself and insists they trust him. Though worried, Toka reluctantly agrees. Deep in the forest, Tanaka glares at Haruka, feeling insulted that he's being challenged by the class loner. He admits that back in the White Void where everyone selected their abilities, he deliberately manipulated things to ensure the remaining skills would be considered worthless. Now, he wants to prove that Haruka's trash-tier abilities can never stand against someone like him. Without warning, Tanaka activates his powers. The ground trembles as rocks and elemental attacks surge toward Haruka. At the same time, he uses his tweak skill, weakening Haruka's body and disrupting his movements. Haruka immediately feels slower and heavier, but he still manages to dodge the incoming attacks. Surprised, Tanaka asks how long Haruka has suspected him, and Haruka admits that his suspicions started the moment he saw a nerd like Tanaka hanging around the bullies. Tanaka laughs and admits that ever since someone else claimed the hijack skill, he had been planning everything from the shadows. While everyone focused on survival, he used tweak to manipulate people and gradually push events in the direction he wanted. As they talk, Tanaka suddenly traps Haruka with roots and launches a massive blast of fire directly at him. Confident the fight is over, he watches the flames consume his opponent. But then, the fire vanishes, and Haruka stands completely unharmed. With the mistletoe charm he accidentally enchanted in Omui absorbing the attack. There, Haruka counterattacks, but Tanaka effortlessly blocks him with a sword before revealing his true strength, summoning multiple weapons and aiming them at Haruka. The battlefield turns into a storm of steel as Tanaka continuously swaps weapons, and Haruka is forced on the defensive as Tanaka overwhelms him with attacks copied from countless classmates. As Haruka observes the pattern, he finally understands that Tanaka's greatest weapon is the copycat skill, where he has been collecting powers specifically to become unbeatable. Tanaka proudly admits his goal was to take Taka's hijack skill next, then eliminate anyone with valuable abilities until he became the strongest person in the world. After continuously being on the defensive, Haruka gets exhausted, and seeing his opponent barely standing, Tanaka believes victory is already secured. He charges forward for the finishing blow, but at the last second, Haruka dodges. Haruka calmly explains that he was pretending to struggle so he could learn the limits of copycat. By carefully watching the battle, he noticed Tanaka never used the same copied ability repeatedly. Hearing this, Tanaka realizes that he's in trouble, and out of anger, he unleashes even more attacks. But Haruka begins adapting, and little by little, the momentum shifts. However, Tanaka refuses to lose, and he declares that all his previous abilities are insignificant compared to his ultimate trump card. Suddenly, Tanaka vanishes and appears behind him, activating his ultimate skill, Instant Death. Everything goes dark, and Haruka collapses. Certain of his victory, Tanaka steps on Haruka's dead body and turns away, but then, he hears a voice, and is shocked to see Haruka standing, fully alive. Tanaka demands an explanation, and Haruka reveals that his well-being skill automatically resists harmful effects, and his maxed-out luck drastically lowers the odds of fatal abilities succeeding. He also reveals that his dummy skill allows him to function like a puppet, reducing the effectiveness of Tweak's control over his body, making Tanaka realize that the very skills he called worthless are the only reason he's still standing. Tanaka is in disbelief, believing that his calculations are flawless, but Haruka simply shrugs, saying that in this world, 1 + 1 is not always 2. For the first time, Tanaka starts tweaking, admitting that life in their old world was unbearably dull, and the portal to another world gave him purpose. He built his entire strategy around becoming perfect, certain nobody could stop him. But now, the one person he never took seriously has ruined everything. Furious, Tanaka attacks again, and Haruka manages to get the upper hand, but Tanaka stabs him. The attack knocks him down, but Haruka refuses to stay down. He tells Tanaka that he's nothing but a lazy bum who relied on his overpowered skill and treated this world like a game, when everyone was desperately trying to survive. Pouring everything into his cane, he combines his so-called worthless skills together and hits Tanaka to defeat him. As the former nerd collapses to his knees, Haruka tells Tanaka that his hard work will always be stronger than his overpowered skill. As Haruka walks away, his body reaches its limit, and the realization hits him that a single mistake could have gotten him chilling right next to Michael Jackson. Then Haruka collapses, but to his luck, the nerds show up and rush to his side. They explain that after returning to town, they found everyone worried sick about him. Realizing something was wrong, they immediately started searching. They then carry the exhausted Haruka back to Omui, and when he returns, he's greeted by the entire class waiting for him. The gals then apologize to the nerds for how they treated them after the camp incident, finally acknowledging how much they sacrificed to keep everyone alive. Even Harumi walks over and gives Haruka a congratulatory high five, marking the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Overwhelmed by all the attention, Haruka quietly considers slipping away, but Toka sees exactly what he's thinking. So before he can escape, she grabs him. Furious, relieved, and emotional all at once, she declares that she and the girls still have plenty to say about his habit of disappearing on his own. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she hugs him and expresses how much she cares for him. Hearing that, Haruka apologizes for making her worry and for making her cry again, but Toka assures her that they are tears of relief, seeing that Haruka kept his promise and came back alive. So for the first time since arriving in this strange new world, their entire class is finally together again. Some nights later, Haruka dreams of a lonely skeletal woman wearing a mask waits in the depths of a dark dungeon. She sits alone in silence, patiently expecting the arrival of someone who never comes. The image lingers in Haruka's mind even after he wakes up. Later, he heads to the Adventurers Guild, where he runs into the nerds. They proudly announce that they have officially become adventurers and are preparing for another dungeon expedition. Their goal is to obtain a rare item rumored to make people like them better. Then, when the nerds leave, Haruka realizes how much they've changed, looking like genuine adventurers now. With Tanaka defeated and the nerds standing on their own, Haruka thinks that it's time to return to his cave and resume his peaceful loner lifestyle. But Toka appears behind him and asks to talk. She reminds him that while the girls already scolded him for fighting Tanaka alone, she never got the chance to properly lecture him herself. She reprimands him for taking on impossible odds, disappearing without warning, and forcing everyone to worry about him. Haruka apologizes repeatedly until Toka finally calms down. As Haruka recovers from the emotional damage, he remembers the item the nerds mentioned, and he believes that with that item, everyone would like him more and not worry too much about him. With that, he decides to find it. Meanwhile, inside Omui's lordly manor, Marielle serves tea to her father. She asks why he is working so hard, and the lord explains that Omui is a frontier town, and recent monster activity has reduced the merchants from coming, endangering the local economy. Just then, a guard bursts into the room to inform them that a large monster horde has been spotted approaching the town. Marielle immediately rushes to the Adventurers Guild to deliver the warning, and everyone make preparations, including Toka. But she quickly realizes that Haruka is not there. At that very moment, Haruka is heading toward the nearby dungeon, and along the way, he encounters a large group of orcs. He decides to use them as a framing ground to level up, and with his magical staff, he defeats the orcs with ease, including their daddy, the Orc King. Then, he arrives at the dungeon and uses his stealth and invisibility abilities to slip past the guards unnoticed. Inside, despite searching several rooms and opening multiple treasure chests, he finds nothing but worthless junk. Frustrated, Haruka realizes he has absolutely no idea how dungeon loot actually works, but he remembers the merchant who specializes in rare items, and realizing the merchant would know more than random treasure chests, Haruka decides to return. Meanwhile, the adventurers at Omui's gates wait nervously for the approaching monster horde, but after a few hours, nobody shows up, which annoys the adventurers. Just as everyone begins questioning the report, a lone figure emerges from the distance, and everyone is ready to fight, but everyone realizes it's just Haruka. Toka immediately informs him that orcs are coming to attack, but completely unbothered, Haruka informs everyone that he already defeated the orcs with ease like playing whack-a-orc. The adventurers stare at him in disbelief, and Toka nearly explodes. Later, Marielle and the guildmaster thank him for preventing the attack, but they also lecture him, explaining that harging into unknown situations alone is incredibly dangerous, especially with monster activity increasing throughout the region. So Haruka reluctantly promises to be more careful. That evening, he sits alone in his room, and realizing that his loner life is drifting away, he knows that he needs to get the item in the dungeon quickly. The next day, Haruka visits the merchant to ask him about the item, and the merchant reveals that the item he's referring to is called the Pheromone Ring. He states that the ring is located beyond the 50th floor of the dungeon, which has 100 floors, with each guarded by a powerful floor master that must be defeated before progressing deeper. He strongly recommends bringing plenty of recovery items, but unfortunately for Haruka, the nerds overhear the entire conversation. Later, the others learn everything, and they quickly assume Haruka wants the ring so that every baddie from Megan Fox to Lana Rhoades will gobble his glizzy, so they decide to stop him. Later that day, Haruka approaches the dungeon entrance again, and the others are there waiting. Toka immediately asks why he wants the pheromone ring, and thinking quickly, Haruka claims he's actually searching for the legendary Solomon ring, which supposedly allows communication with animals. But nobody believes his lie, and Haruka quickly sprints into the dungeon, while the girls pursue him through the crowded entrance. Toka repeatedly warns him to watch for traps, but Haruka confidently declares that his maxed out luck stat will protect him. Suddenly, he triggers a trap, and the floor disappears beneath him. Toka dives forward and grabs his hand, and for a moment she has him, but her grip then slips, and Haruka plummets into darkness. Thinking quickly, he uses earth magic to transform the ground below into a giant bouncing surface. When he finally regains his bearings, he realizes that he has fallen beneath the known dungeon floors. He tries his Ahir walk to escape, but fails. However, the dungeon grants him several new abilities, including trap detection and spatial awareness. Using these skills, Haruka navigates a hidden corridor while struggling against increasingly dense miasma. Then he reaches an enormous door, and a powerful presence waits on the other side. Haruka opens it, and standing before him is the same skeletal figure from his dream, the Dungeon Emperor. Using appraisal, he discovers that the monster is level 100, while most of its information remains hidden. Meanwhile, the others desperately look for him, and after fighting their way through dozens of floors, they discover a teleportation gate. The nerds explain that Haruka couldn't have used it, and also reveal the terrifying legend of the Dungeon Emperor, the ruler said to dwell beneath the oldest great dungeons. It frightens everyone, and some questions whether they can continue. But then, Chika reminds everyone of how Haruka has always risked himself to save them, and now it's their turn to help him. Back with Haruka, he studies the Dungeon Emperor, and its hidden statistics and overwhelming presence make it clear that this is unlike anything he has faced before. Then, he charges at the boss, and launches a powerful strike, but the Dungeon Emperor blocks it effortlessly. For a moment, neither side moves, but Haruka smiles, as for the first time since fighting Tanaka, he has found an opponent who truly feels impossible to defeat, which only makes him more determined to win. Meanwhile, back in Omui, the Lord watches the situation around the dungeon with growing concern as Muriel notices strange signs appearing around the area. She fears the orc attack was only the beginning of something much worse. Following her father's advice, she heads to the Adventurers Guild and informs the guildmaster about the abnormal monster activity. The guildmaster immediately prepares for a possible disaster, though he is troubled by the fact that the dungeon is being watched by only one unreliable guard who may not understand the severity of the situation. Gotek and the others volunteer to take responsibility for guarding the dungeon themselves, while the guildmaster wonders where Haruka, Toka, and the rest of their group have disappeared to. Marielle grows uneasy, realizing that the people they are counting on may already be trapped inside. Deep within the dungeon, Haruka focuses entirely on defeating the Dungeon Emperor. Knowing he cannot win through ordinary attacks, he pushes his speed ability further and charges forward with a relentless series of strikes. However, the Dungeon Emperor's movements are beyond anything he has encountered before, effortlessly matching him and dodging every attack. During the fight, Haruka suddenly experiences a vision of himself being struck down, and he manages to avoid the attack just in time. He realizes that this new ability allows him to predict danger before it happens, but even with that advantage, he knows one mistake would mean defeat. The battle continues until Haruka's stamina and magic begin to run out. As the Dungeon Emperor approaches, Haruka expects the fight to end, but he realizes that the creature has multiple opportunities to finish him, yet refuses to do so. Unlike other monsters, it does not seem driven by the desire to destroy him. Instead, Haruka senses that the Dungeon Emperor is fighting because it has no choice. Investigating further, Haruka discovers that a dark miasma is controlling the Dungeon Emperor and forcing it to attack. Realizing this, he uses his cane to absorb the darkness little by little while continuing the battle. Eventually, he removes all of the corruption, freeing the Dungeon Emperor from its control. The creature then lowers its weapon, revealing that it had been waiting for someone to release it from its endless suffering. However, the darkness suddenly returns and attempts to take over again. Haruka considers defeating the creature, but he cannot bring himself to destroy someone who has clearly been trapped and suffering for so long. Instead, he reaches out and embraces it, recognizing the loneliness of the Dungeon Emperor as something similar to his own past. This triggers his subjugate skill, completely removing the curse and binding the Dungeon Emperor to him. Haruka does not fully understand how the ability works, but he is relieved that the creature has finally been freed. When he checks its status, he discovers that its level has reset to 1, and that the Dungeon Emperor's true name is Angelica. As Haruka and Angelica begin leaving the deepest part of the dungeon, they reach the 100th floor and discover the original floor master, a level 100 living armor, waiting for them. Haruka realizes that he is facing another powerful enemy immediately after his battle with the Dungeon Emperor. Instead of fighting directly, he attempts to create an escape route by using earth magic to break through the ceiling. However, when he looks upward, he discovers two level 99 minotaurs waiting above. Before Haruka can figure out a plan, Angelica suddenly moves forward and defeats all three enemies by herself. Haruka is shocked by how powerful she remains despite being reduced to level 1. After the battle, Angelica becomes interested in the living armor left behind by the floor master and decides to wear it. At first, the armor is far too large for her body, but it suddenly reshapes itself and perfectly fits her. Haruka uses appraisal and discovers that the armor carries a curse. Angelica immediately becomes upset, and her reaction reminds Haruka of Toka's strict personality. Then, the duo reaches the 98th floor, where Haruka encounters a lich and uses appraisal to learn that normal physical attacks and regular magic are ineffective against it. Remembering that his cane was able to purify the Dungeon Emperor's darkness, he tests it on the lich and defeats the monster instantly. This makes Haruka realize that the cane has a special power against dark creatures. On the 97th floor, Haruka encounters a group of venom moths. Knowing their poison could quickly defeat him, he uses his creativity instead of relying on strength. He creates a powerful fireball, attracts the moths toward it, and then increases the flames until the entire group is destroyed. Continuing upward, he reaches the 95th floor and senses an extremely powerful presence. A living sword appears and attacks him, moving unlike any normal monster. Haruka struggles because his attacks cannot predict the weapon's movements, and the sword overwhelms him by summoning multiple blades. Realizing the enemy is too difficult to handle alone, Haruka calls on Angelica for help. Despite her new level, her overwhelming presence frightens the living sword. With a single strike, Angelica destroys it, proving that her strength as the former Dungeon Emperor is still far beyond ordinary monsters. Back on the 50th floor, Toka's group faces their own difficult battle against the Cyclops. Their attacks fail to defeat it, and exhaustion begins to take over. As the situation becomes desperate, they think about how Haruka would handle the problem and decide to rely on teamwork instead of individual strength. Harumi rushes forward using his acceleration ability, while the others support him with their skills. However, the Cyclops quickly counters and knocks him away. Despite this, Harumi reveals that his attack was only meant to create an opening. While the monster is distracted, the others line up a shot directly at the Cyclops' eye, and they defeat it. Meanwhile, Haruka and Angelica finally reach the 85th floor. The entire dungeon suddenly begins to shake violently. Haruka senses that something is happening throughout the dungeon, as countless monsters begin moving at once. The strange disturbance signals that the dungeon situation is escalating, and something far greater is about to unfold. Outside the dungeon, the guard on duty is surprised when a wave of frightened rats suddenly escapes from the dungeon entrance. Confused and alarmed, he looks inside and realizes that countless monsters are gathering near the exit. Horrified by what he sees, he immediately rushes to the Adventurers Guild to report the situation. The guildmaster listens carefully and recognizes the signs of a dungeon stampede, a disaster that occurs when monsters from the deepest floors can no longer be contained. The guild members immediately worry about Haruka's group, knowing they are still somewhere inside. But the guildmaster explains using old dungeon records that the only way to stop such a catastrophe is to defeat the final boss on the lowest floor. Gotek wonders who could possibly defeat such a powerful enemy, and Mariel thinks of Haruka, though she refuses to rely only on him. Before they can make a decision, the entire building shakes as the monsters begin moving. The guildmaster orders Gotek and Ofter to evacuate civilians while the remaining adventurers prepare to defend the town. Despite the danger, the guildmaster feels a strange excitement. Together, they fight against the first wave of monsters and manage to repel the attack. However, the guildmaster realizes that if Haruka's group had already defeated the final boss, the stampede should have ended. He decides someone must enter the dungeon and deliver information to Haruka, making everyone look toward Mariel. Although she has never entered a dungeon before and fears what awaits her, she decides to go after seeing how badly her people need help. Ofter joins her as an escort, and the two prepare to enter the dangerous dungeon. Inside the dungeon, Haruka continues climbing upward with Angelica, giving the floor bosses the 10-piece chicken nugget combo from Popeyes. When he encounters a group of aggressive flying monsters, he uses a fish as bait to distract them before taking them down easily. Moving forward, he reaches a flooded area where he suspects the floor boss is hiding beneath the water. His prediction proves correct as swordfish-like monsters suddenly attack him. Angelica immediately protects him, cutting down the creatures before they can strike, and Haruka realizes their speed makes them extremely dangerous, so he uses his ice abilities to freeze sections of the water, slowing them down and allowing him to defeat them one by one. However, a massive swordfish suddenly attacks from below and sends him falling into the water. Angelica prepares to fight it alone, but Haruka returns by creating a makeshift surfboard using his skills. He rides across the waves, avoids the monster's attacks, and uses his dummy skill to create an opening before defeating the creature. After defeating another floor boss, Haruka collects valuable treasures and continues deeper into the dungeon with Angelica. Along the way, he finds several rare items, including a ring that increases luck, a bracelet capable of removing curses, and a special orb connected to necromancy. Realizing these items could help Angelica, he gives them all to her instead of keeping them for himself. The effects begin removing the curse that has trapped her, and she finally removes her helmet, revealing her true appearance as the anime version of Sydney Sweeney. Meanwhile, Toka and the others continue searching through the dungeon while trying to reach Haruka. On the 54th floor, they are attacked by werewolves. Although they defeat them, the constant battles have drained their strength. While resting, they suddenly hear someone approaching and prepare for another fight, only to discover that it is Muriel and Ofter. When Muriel learns that Haruka is not with Toka's group, she breaks down, fearing something happened to him. But Toka reassures her that Haruka will survive, because he always finds a way through impossible situations. As they continue forward, Haruka reaches a floor filled with lava. The extreme heat quickly weakens him, forcing him to stop and recover. Angelica notices a safer area, and Haruka rests there while searching for a way to cool himself down. He notices air flowing from a crack in the wall, so he creates an opening and uses the breeze to recover. At the same time, Toka's group notices the same airflow and realizes someone is behind the wall. After opening a passage, they finally reunite with Haruka. He learns from Muriel that the town is being attacked by the dungeon monsters and that the adventurers are barely holding them back. She explains that another wave is coming and that defeating the final boss is the only way to stop the disaster. Haruka laughs and reveals that he already defeated the boss, surprising everyone. However, Ofter points out that if the boss was truly defeated, the monster stampede would have stopped already. This makes Haruka realize the truth that the real final boss is not the rock, but it's Angelica herself. Haruka remembers that when he first met Angelica, he considered fighting her because she was the dungeon's strongest monster. However, after learning about her past and seeing that she had been trapped inside the dungeon for years, he cannot view her as an enemy anymore. He admits that he has not truly defeated the final boss yet, but promises that he will find another way, refusing to sacrifice Angelica just to save the town. When the others question why Toka still believes in him, she explains that Haruka has always managed to protect them when it mattered most, as even though he constantly causes trouble and takes strange approaches, he has never abandoned them. Hearing this, Haruka becomes determined once again. He decides that he will stop the monster's stampede, protect his friends, and save Angelica from the fate that trapped her for so long. Back in the dungeon, Haruka and Angelica continue their journey upward while Haruka searches for another solution. Instead of seeing Angelica as the enemy, he begins thinking of a way to free her completely from the curse controlling her. With the town's survival depending on him, Haruka pushes forward, determined to overcome the impossible challenge ahead. Outside, Gotek and the guild members continue defending Omui as waves of dungeon monsters pour toward the city. Exhaustion begins to take over as Gotek struggles to keep fighting, but the guildmaster reminds him that Muriel risked herself by entering the dungeon to deliver their message, so if she was willing to face that danger, then they cannot afford to give up now. Everyone understands that their only hope is Haruka and his classmates, the only people capable of reaching the dungeon's source and stopping the disaster. Deep inside the dungeon, Haruka and Toka's groups continue moving separately, both fighting through countless floors while trying to reunite. Haruka and Angelica make steady progress, with Haruka using his strange strategies to create openings, while Angelica effortlessly defeats the enemies in their path. As they collect various treasures, Haruka remains frustrated that he still has not discovered the pheromone ring he originally wanted. Angelica notices his exhaustion and tries to encourage him to rest, but Haruka misunderstands her concern and assumes she is simply telling him to be more careful. Refusing to slow down, he continues forward because he wants to reunite with his friends as quickly as possible. Eventually, Haruka reaches the 69th floor, where a strange owl appears in front of him. Using his appraisal ability, he identifies it as a mesmer owl and realizes its main ability is hypnosis through sleep magic. The owl locks eyes with him, and Haruka believes his high stamina will allow him to resist its effects. However, after fighting non-stop for so long, his body finally reaches its limit. His vision fades, and he collapses into sleep. When he wakes up, he finds himself being carried by Angelica. Embarrassed that he caused her trouble, Haruka apologizes, but Angelica simply tells him through her actions that he needs to rely on her more. She then continues carrying him upward without hesitation. Meanwhile, Toka and the others reach the 100th floor and face the dungeon's final guardian, a powerful sphinx. The group immediately attacks, but every wound they inflict heals instantly. After explains that this Sphinx is different from normal monsters because it cannot be defeated through ordinary combat, and its true purpose is to challenge adventurers with riddles, making it practically impossible to defeat it by force. Toka becomes frustrated because after fighting all this way to find Haruka, they may now be defeated by an enemy they cannot overcome. Just as the Sphinx prepares to attack, Haruka wakes up and senses the battle happening nearby. Realizing his friends are in danger, he rushes toward them. The Sphinx attacks Toka, but Haruka arrives at the perfect moment. He equips his duality gauntlets and combines them with his special glove that can cancel both physical and magical resistance. With one powerful strike, he breaks through the Sphinx's immunity. Angelica immediately follows up, cutting down the monster with a single attack. Toka is relieved to finally see Haruka again and scolds him for making everyone worry. The others celebrate their reunion, but Toka quickly becomes curious about the mysterious knight accompanying him. Haruka starts introducing Angelica, but before he can explain what she is, the floor suddenly collapses. Toka rushes forward and grabs him before he falls. She refuses to let him disappear again, leaving Haruka frustrated because her protectiveness threatens his dream of living as a carefree loner and goon alone in peace. Despite the chaos, the group is happy to finally be together. But their reunion is interrupted when they learn that the third wave of monsters is already approaching Omui. Everyone worries about how the town can survive another attack, but Haruka calmly explains that Angelica is the answer. Confused, the others ask what he means, but Marielle urges them to return immediately because the city is in danger. After suggests using the warp gate to return, which annoys Haruka because he never received one himself. After laughs, explaining that Haruka is unusual because he is the first person to clear the dungeon by climbing upward from the lowest floor. Before leaving, Haruka reassures Toka that he will solve the problem, just like he always has. When Haruka's group returns to Omui, the guild members are shocked and relieved to see them alive. The defenders celebrate because they managed to survive the first two waves of the stampede. However, Muriel quickly warns everyone that the third wave is far larger and is already approaching. Inside the city, the Lord tries to calm the civilians while the guild prepares for the final battle. Outside the gates, the true stampede appears, with a massive army of monsters advancing toward Omui. The sight overwhelms the defenders, as the number of enemies seems impossible to defeat. Haruka looks toward Angelica, and she steps forward without hesitation. She draws her sword and places it into the ground, releasing a powerful wave of energy across the battlefield. Angelica then reveals her true identity as the Dungeon Emperor, the being with authority over all dungeon monsters. Her power spreads throughout the battlefield, and when the light disappears, the entire monster army has vanished. The guild members are stunned, but Haruka calmly approaches Angelica and celebrates their victory with her. He explains that she was the one who helped him throughout the dungeon and that she is not a threat. The guild members realize that as the Dungeon Emperor, Angelica possesses the ability to control dungeon monsters, and Haruka confirms that the monsters were not destroyed but instead returned to the dungeon, meaning Omui is finally safe. The city erupts in celebration, relieved that the crisis has ended. Several days later, Haruka gathers his classmates at a hotel and reveals a large collection of treasures he obtained from the dungeon. He announces that he is selling the items, but everyone immediately becomes distracted by the rare equipment and artifacts. Seeing the girls dominating, Haruka quietly gives the boys the treasures he had already prepared for them, making them extremely grateful. Haruka is happy that his discoveries can help his friends become stronger, but he is worried about Angelica, who after spending so many years isolated inside the dungeon, has little experience interacting with others. Haruka realizes that helping her adjust to normal life will be his next challenge. Just then, Toka visits him and thanks both him and Angelica for everything they have done. When she asks about Angelica's identity, Haruka reluctantly reveals that she is actually the Dungeon Emperor, a being who was once trapped in the form of a living skeleton before he freed her using his subjugate skill. Toka is shocked and immediately questions how and why he managed to turn the dungeon boss into his servant. After hearing the explanation, she decides to take Angelica away so she can learn more about her, leaving Haruka worried since Angelica has barely interacted with anyone for years. Toka then brings Angelica to the girls' room, where everyone begins trying to get to know her. Since Angelica still cannot speak, she only responds through small gestures and nods. As they learn about her past, the girls realize that Angelica is not some terrifying monster but simply a girl who was trapped by a curse for a long time. They understand that Haruka's subjugate skill did not destroy her freedom, but instead released her from the fate that had controlled her. Because of this, Toka decides to treat Angelica as one of their own. Later, the girls invite Angelica to bathe with them and help remove her armor. At first, they expect to see the skeletal body they have heard about, but as the armor comes off piece by piece, they discover that Angelica has the type of body most women would get operations and BBLs for, which shocks them. That night, Haruka reflects on everything that happened. Although he gained new skills and reached level 18, he feels disappointed because he still never found the pheromone ring he originally wanted. Instead, he notices that Angelica was the one who saved everyone during the monster stampede, making him realize how much stronger she is compared to him. Rather than feeling defeated, this motivates him to train harder, and he decides to return to the forest where he originally became stronger. The next day, he visits Toke and explains his plan. She agrees because the dungeon threat has ended, but Haruka notices Angelica quietly sitting nearby and invites her to come along. Toka hesitates, realizing she feels some jealousy about Haruka spending time with Angelica, but she ultimately allows them to go because she believes it will help Angelica adjust to normal life. When Haruka and Angelica arrive at the forest, he immediately feels comfortable being surrounded by nature again. He decides to test one of his new abilities and uses his phase skill, but when he loses control near a cliff, he accidentally falls. Thanks to his other abilities, he survives and realizes he still needs more practice. Shortly after, Angelica also loses her footing and falls, forcing Haruka to catch her. He is surprised by how heavy she is despite once being a skeleton, and Angelica becomes embarrassed to be called a fatty after years of being a skeleton. They eventually reach Haruka's old cave, where he happily returns to his handmade bath. While joking around, he casually invites Angelica to join him before immediately realizing how strange the situation sounds. However, Angelica suddenly appears in her human form, causing Haruka to almost paint the whole room white.
Wow! Beautiful!
But once he calms down, both of them become awkward and embarrassed. Later that night, Haruka learns from Angelica about her history, and how the Dungeon Emperor had already been defeated long ago, and the items he gave her helped restore her body and remove the curse controlling her. Haruka begins feeling responsible for her because he believes he changed her entire life. He tells Angelica that she does not have to stay with him, and that she is free to choose her own path. However, Angelica shows that she does not want to be alone again after spending so long isolated in the dungeon. Realizing that she simply wants someone beside her, Haruka decides to stay and keep her company. He shares stories about his strange journey, and Angelica slowly begins to smile as she realizes that Haruka also understands loneliness. The following day, Haruka challenges Angelica to a sparring match because he wants to measure his growth. Angelica agrees, and the two begin fighting. Without the curse restricting her, Angelica's speed and strength are overwhelming, reminding Haruka of the Dungeon Emperor he fought before. However, he uses his phase skill to avoid her attacks and realizes he has improved. Even though he still cannot match her, he refuses to give up. Eventually, Angelica lands a strike on him, and she immediately worries that she hurt him. But Haruka reassures her and admits that his skills still have a long way to go, promising to one day be strong enough to surpass her. After training, the two spend time together by the river. Haruka teaches Angelica how to fish using his abilities and decides to prepare a hot pot instead of simply cooking the fish normally. While preparing the meal, he teaches her how to cut ingredients, and he is surprised by how naturally talented she is at cooking. They then enjoy the food together until nothing is left, leaving Haruka satisfied that he can still experience simple moments of happiness in this new world. Later, Angelica asks Haruka to sit beside her and attempts to give him a shoulder massage as thanks. Her technique is awkward, but Haruka pretends it helps because he appreciates the effort. Wanting to encourage her, he guides her while they spend the night together under the stars. He pats her head, and although Angelica still struggles to express herself, Haruka admires her determination to improve. The next day, Haruka and Angelica return to Umui. Rain begins falling along the way, so Haruka grabs her hand and rushes forward to avoid getting soaked. When they arrive, the girls immediately notice how close the two have become and start questioning what happened during their time together. Toka stops them and welcomes Angelica back instead. Later, the boys also question Haruka about his time alone with Angelica, but he quickly dismisses them. Angelica approaches him nervously, and Haruka encourages her to spend time with the others while he leaves. Before he walks away, Angelica finally manages to speak for the first time and quietly expresses her gratitude toward him, and Haruka is surprised but happy to hear her voice. Watching Angelica become closer with everyone, Haruka realizes that every person around him carries their own fears, worries, and struggles. However, those burdens become easier when people have someone who supports them. And with that realization, Haruka decides to continue surviving in this new world alone, while having himself open for people to bond with him. If you watch this anime recap until the end, comment down, Lonely Goon. That's it for this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and if you want to see more, watch this video on screen.